My name's McCarron. I'm a real estate agent in the Boston area, and I'm also the author of a book called Real Estate Investing, Is It For You? Today we're getting ready to put a deck onto the front of the tiny house, and true to form, it's going to be a recycled deck. This deck was pulled off of a house that I'm renovating in Boston, actually in Revere on the beach. Call it the beach house. And it just wasn't big enough for that house, so it's still fine. All the lumber's in good condition, so why not use it and put it here? You can see, though, already the first challenge that we're running into is that what should be the sill of the house, it should be one continuous piece of nice thick board, is actually a whole bunch of little tiny pieces cobbled together. So we're either going to have to address that or hope that attaching these nice big pieces of pressure treated lumber is going to be enough. These gnarly nails we're holding on the old deck, they actually get nailed through this joist hanger. So what happens is the boards that are going to support the flooring sit right inside here, and then you nail through the sides, and that is going to hold the boards that are going to hold the deck. We use these long bolts called carriage bolts, and that's what actually secures the deck to the house. So put them on there with a washer and screw them in. And since they're 6 inches long, they go through the board that's holding up the deck, they go through the sill, all the way into the strongest part of the house. First we leveled the board and made sure, and then marked where it was going. And then we put one carriage bolt in, and leveled it again, just to make sure that when we screwed in the second bolt, it was going to be in the right place. And then you can go in and add a couple more in the middle. That part's easy. Pre-drill the hole for the carriage bolts. Hammer them in as far as you can, and then you start ratcheting them in. So we're using 2x4s just to hold up the ends of the boards while we put the end piece on. The deck is going to have a little bit of an angle so that the water will go off the end a little bit. So it's just about 2 inches different from one end to the other. We start the screws before we actually hold up the decking, because that makes it easier, so you're not trying to hold up this big heavy piece of wood and put the screws in at the same time. Now we've got all the recycled floor joists in, and all we have to do basically is screw on the decking. The one thing we haven't done yet is actually found a replacement for these 2x4s that are holding up the end of the deck, but we're going to make some legs, I think. This piece of metal is called flashing, and what it does is it tucks up underneath the siding and then underneath the floor decking, so that when water comes, it keeps it from getting up inside the house. So these are the legs. That's what we're going to use for legs to hold up the deck. We're putting them on top of cement pads. Normally when you build a deck, you dig a 4-foot hole and you fill it with cement, and then you put a leg on top of that 4-foot hole full of cement. But since this deck is small and it's barely a foot off the ground, we just want something so that it doesn't collapse out in on us. We decided to make like a frame on the outside edge of the deck. So we had to do 45-degree angles, which can be kind of tricky. The easiest thing to do is to cut the angle first, then measure it and cut it to length. This end piece has 2 angles. So we used our square and cut very carefully, and came out good. This little triangle is called a square in the logic of a builder. But the reason is actually very simple, because it helps to keep things square. So if I want to know that I'm making a straight line, I can put this on the top of the board, and then I know that the line that I make here is going to be straight. And when I'm cutting, I can use the square as well, because I'll hold it and I'll put it on the edge of the saw. I'll show you what I mean. So if I want to cut this board, say my line is here, so I make my line using the square. Okay, that's where I want to cut. Now I line the saw up with the line that I want to cut. And then I line my square up with my saw. And when I make my cut, I just make my saw follow along the edge of the square. I'm going to have a nice straight cut. We're using this great new gizmo called Camo. It's a new way to screw on decking so that you don't have to see the screws. See, it loads in on either side. You need to screw it in. It actually puts the screw in at an angle, so when you put the next one in, you won't be able to see it. Even though these old ones have lots of screw holes, I still think it makes sense to use that. Since we didn't have enough old decking to do the whole thing, well, not enough of the old decking was in good enough condition, so we're alternating old and new to kind of make a pattern. Hey, you just got to do what you can with what you got. You need to leave a space in between the boards for the water and moisture, and also if you have a really humid day, the wood will swell a little bit and you don't want it to buckle. And also, it's a real pain in the neck if they're too close and then you try to sweep, things get stuck. It's really a drag. So I'm just going to measure right across here to where it's going to hit the other board, and that's 23 inches. So I know I have to cut 23 inches. And then I need to put the board where I want it to go. So if it's going to be a little bit away from the house, I see that it's overlapping a certain amount of the other board, and I also want to leave a space. So basically I'm going to measure the amount that it overlaps and then add the amount that I want for an extra space to accommodate the swelling of the board, and I'm going to cut about 3/4 of an inch. So on this side I have to go 3/4 of an inch in and 23 inches down and cut that notch out. And I'm going to do the same thing on the other side. I have this much smaller notch. Basically it's just going to be 3 inches, and it already almost sits in here. So I'm just basically going to leave the amount of the space, and that's about 1/4 of an inch. Because the blade is curved, when you make your cuts, the blade is going to actually have to go deeper into the wood than where you want it to actually cut. So you always want to cut from the back, and that way you'll get much less of a mark on the front where you've had to overcut to get the back of the blade in. And now the moment of truth, where we see if my cuts were accurate. I'm going to slide the board in. And hey, it fits. Nice. And this is just going to get pushed in a little bit more. So we've got that gap, and now I can screw it down. Excellent. Well, the deck is finished, and we can finally use it for its intended purpose. Say hi, John. He's tired from working. We put the stairs on, and John rounded the corners so that they aren't sharp corners sticking out to stab people as they go by. Got the final piece on the door, by the door, to make that gap go away, and we added this little platform for the grill. Overall, I would say it's a success. Now we can just sit, relax, and enjoy the mountain.